Good morning, Megan.
Hi, Andrea. How are you?
It's kind of fun to get to connect early in the morning and have a cup of tea together.
I know. I love it. This is like number three. It's exciting.
I know. So lots of questions coming in,
Lots of
and I
questions.
want to make sure that we are addressing what's coming up for people and putting it into as much context, as much functional nutrition context as we can.
Yeah. So the one I that's been coming in pretty rapidly and quite frequently is around elderberries and
Hmm.
the cytokine storm, the possibility of the cytokine storm. And I know all of us are interested and excited to hear you put some context around this because you're so good at it.
Oh, good. I will try to do my best with what we know. So I think what I want to do is just back it up as I am wont to do, and look at like who we're talking about. So when we look at mechanisms in isolation without understanding why we're looking at mechanisms, it can get really confusing. And this is where the misinformation stems from. So we have to think about who we're talking about. And remember, when we think through a functional lens, we're considering the fact that all things are connected in the body. We are each unique and all things matter. And what we've been really focusing on with the circle of influence is that all things matter. Without knowing enough about the virus itself and your susceptibility to the virus, we have to think about all the things that we can do to influence. Some of these things that we do to influence can and do include supporting our immune function, which really bring us back to who we are in the process. So, are we the worried well that are in prevention mode? Like, I don't want to get the coronavirus and have COVID-19? Are we people who are having symptoms, whether they're allergies? We were just talking about how bad the allergies are right now in the Pacific Northwest, or getting a cold or flu, which is also happening right now? Or is it the coronavirus and we are or are not part of that population who's going to be able to get through it? Sometimes people without even knowing they have it, or without any symptoms, or with very mild symptoms. So who are we? And again, going on that spectrum, are we somebody who's been diagnosed but sent home to weather it? Or are we somebody who's been diagnosed and is highly symptomatic and should be under a doctor's, and both those people should be under doctor medical care, but those people who are highly symptomatic and are in danger because they're having some of the more severe symptoms related to respiratory dysfunction, hallucinating, fevers. Where are we on the spectrum? And where we are on that spectrum really informs what we do and what we use in our at-home apothecary. So this is where elderberry comes into the picture, and the confusion happens because a cytokine storm is what is happening for those people who are at the very end of the spectrum, where there's a number of things happening in the body, and that includes secondary bacterial infections as well. There's a lot happening in the body to try to fight the onslaught of the virus and other pathogens that are coming into the body as a result of the immune system being so overwhelmed. But let's go to the other side of the spectrum and think about the fact that if you're the worried well and you're in the prevention mode, if you are symptomatic and you don't know what it is, but you're kind of like wanting to support your immune system, if you're in that population, it is fine to be working with normal doses of our at-home apothecaries. And normal doses is something we've talked about in other videos in terms of don't take high doses of anything ever unless you're under the guidance of somebody who's recommended that for something that's particular to you. But eating our nutrients, taking immune supportive herbs like elderberry or echinacea, if it works for you, doesn't work for me, sleeping, really working in our circle of influence. At that stage, we're not worried about a cytokine storm, and we're not inciting a cytokine storm by working in prevention. Cytokines are a good thing. They are pro-inflammatory to go clean up messes. Sleep, elderberry, echinacea, these are things in our at-home toolkit that increase our cytokines appropriately. There is a point where we do not want to increase our cytokines anymore because they haven't regulated. What comes up must come down. A cytokine storm is where things are not coming down. They're not regulating. We think about this a lot with cortisol, right? When somebody is in fight or flight, it's appropriate. It's a good response. Stress is a good thing unless it keeps being fed and fueled and doesn't come down. That's, as I understand it, what we're working with a cytokine storm. Let's talk about who we are and not worry about taking the things that are nutrient dense and rich and supportive for us in the prevention stages.
That's
That was
so
a
helpful.
long soapbox.
No, that was so good, because I think what happens in these situations is people want, and I mean, I'll say this for myself as somebody who does struggle with anxiety, it's like you want the yes or the no. And what you're saying is we have to really work with our bodies, work with where we are on the spectrum, back it up so that we can really clearly see and make decisions, so that we're not in that fight or flight place of making the decision and actually allowing what can be very supportive in whatever phase that we're in to work for our body. So working with the sleep, working with the elderberry if we're, in phase one and in that prevention place. But then if things start to ramp up, just being able to recognize where you are and make the proper calls.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things that come to mind when you say that, Megan. And one is, at what point do you know to either add more or remove more? And if we're talking about a medical situation, in this case, because it's a medical situation that we don't know a lot about yet, we're still learning, it's about removal of things. Again, as you get to the place where you're really going, I need to get a diagnosis now, like this is something, just remove until we know more. That's where our cutoff is. All those phases up until I think that honestly, I'm called my doctor and they told me to get a test, or I've tested positive. At that point, then we're saying hey, we don't know enough about this or how it's going to progress in my body. We just don't know, right? So that's our point at which we say it's about removal, not addition.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're kind of in that prevention mode, and there are a lot of symptoms coming up now. The other thing that came to mind for me, Megan, is this situation gives us a really good opportunity to illuminate what functional really means, because we're not just treating the condition. There is no, this is what you do for when you get COVID-19, because we're seeing people along the spectrum. What better way to illuminate that all people who have a condition do not behave the same? Because again, we are all unique on the inside. We're all different. We have different susceptibility, not just based on our pre-existing conditions, but based on our genetics, based on our lifestyle, based on so many different factors, our food that we eat, our environment, what we breathe. So many things influence our susceptibility. And that is what it means to look at things through a functional lens. I just kind of want to underscore that, because we're in it. We're in the fact that the X for Y, especially when it comes to diet and lifestyle, doesn't work. We're also seeing that it doesn't work necessarily for medication prevention. We're just learning. So I just wanted to kind of give that a little spotlight here.
Yeah, no, you gave me chills. My whole spine went brrr as you were saying that, because it's also very empowering to hear that, and really looking at our uniqueness and the uniqueness of those that we work with and those that we love. Good stuff.
I think we covered that one. We'll probably get more questions in response, but bring them on.
Yeah.
Catch that phone number. We want to hear your questions. We've got that hotline. It's not to respond to your questions. It's to respond to your questions in this way.
But yeah.
We'll call you back, but we are capturing your questions. So use that phone number. And Megan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was so fun.